Following 2 races at Croft, round 3 of Britcar's Dunlop Endurance Championship took the teams to Brands Hatch and the short but thrilling Indy circuit. VR Motorsport arrived in Kent as the overall championship leaders, following a maiden victory at Croft for Danny Harrison in the number 85 Praga R1T. A knee injury meant that teammate Jem Hepworth had been forced to sit out the season opener, but she would now join Harrison for the 3rd race of the season.
Me and Danny have a really good relationship. I learn off of him. Obviously he's been racing a lot more than I have. Like, he's done years, he's done Ginetta, he's done Ford Fiesta, so I can learn back and forth from him, which is really good to have for me because it's my first, full season in cars.
Another squad enjoying success in the opening weekend had been CJJ Motorsport with Beluga.
This year was going to be a learning year, but we got off to a great start in Croft. We got a 1st and a 2nd place in the class, so that was absolutely a mega start. But we know that the class is incredibly competitive, so there's a good bit of work to do, but yeah, we're confident with the car and we're confident what we need to work on, so yeah, we'll see how we go. I'm not going to get too wound up just yet, but we'll see.
Never driven until we went to Croft, or we did one test day. I didn't really know what to expect because I'd never driven anything GT style, so it was really good to get used to the ABS, how the car handles. It's quite a heavy car. It's basically a road car, so you can go and buy this off the shelf, and yeah, so it's a really good car. Really enjoy driving it.
Danny Harrison set the pace in qualifying, claiming a 2nd consecutive pole position for VR Motorsport.
It was a bit of a difficult qualifying for us because our radio in the comms stopped working. We didn't really have an idea of what kind of pace we was doing or what position we was in. We got one lap that was just clean with no other than the slower cars around, and that was spot on. That's all we needed, was one clean lap just so we could actually push the hardest and not get held up by anybody.
And it would be an all-Praga front row, with Jack Fabi going 2nd fastest in the sister car. Meanwhile, round 1 winners Raw Motorsport qualified 3rd, with the Radical of Ben Dimmock and Steve Burgess also ending the session as the fastest Class 2 car. Just 0.3 of a second behind them was the best of the Class 3 runners, Benji Hetherington and Adam Hatfield, 4th fastest in the Beluga Racing Porsche. However, they only just made it onto the 2nd row of the grid, with reigning champions Paul Bailey and Andy Schultz just 45 thousandths of a second slower in the SB Race Engineering Ferrari. Completing the top 6 was the CRH Racing pair of Tom Bradshaw and Jonathan Evans, their BMW topping the times in Class 4. After a technical issue meant they missed qualifying, Warren McKinley and Martin Compton would have to start the race from the pit lane in the normally aspirated Class 2 Praga. As ever, there would be a rolling start for the 1-hour race, and as the lights went out, Jem Hepworth led the charge into Paddock Hill Bend, but with Gary Townsend getting his nose in front after a slightly better start. As the pair ran side by side into turn 1, Sean Doyle was busy making a positive start in the CJJ Motorsport Porsche. Running up Hellwoods and into Druids for the first time, and Hepworth had managed to fend off the close attentions of Townsend, with Ben Dimmock holding 3rd in the Radical. The Blue Ligier of Luke Davenport took 6th place away from Paul Bailey's Ferrari, and Doyle followed the ex-BTCC driver through. Behind the 3 leading sports cars, the Porsches of Adam Hatfield and Mark Cunningham ran 4th and 5th through Graham Hill Bend. Meanwhile, Warren McKinley was on his way, following the pit lane start. Someone else trying to move through the order was Ben Sharich in the Mac G Racing Taranis, after a problem in qualifying meant the yellow machine had started back in 21st spot. During the opening laps, a battle for 2nd place in Class 4 developed between Sean Doyle and Martin Byford, who had advanced from 13th to 8th in the BPM Motorsport Seat. The pair ran wheel-to-wheel on several occasions, all the while having to try and fend off the Class 2 Ferrari 488 of Paul Bailey, who had the straight line advantage. Doyle fended him off, and Byford held the tighter inside line to eventually regain the position up Hellwoods Hill and under braking into Druids. Aboard the Digiplat Racing BMW, Nathan Wells was running in 12th place overall, until he was passed by Marcus Fothergill on lap 6, the Bespoke Cars Porsche progressing from 19th on the grid. Meanwhile, the Beluga Porsche of Adam Hatfield had gained a place. The Class 3 leader was now shadowing the 2nd place Praga of Townsend. And another Class 3 car, the SG Racing 997 of Mark Cunningham, came through into 4th place. The reason the 2 Porsches had moved up the order was the demise of the Raw Motorsport Radical. Ben Dimmock pit-bound due to a gearbox failure. This then promoted the Reflex Racing Ligier of Davenport into 5th place overall, and he was also leading Class 4. The highest placed BMW in the race was Evans in 9th, but the black and red CRH Racing E46 was being reeled in by Mike Moss in the green and black Class 2 1M. Carrying the onboard camera, Moss homed in on the exit to Paddock Hill Bend and made sure of the place under braking into Druids. Also behind the wheel of a BMW, Nathan Wells was now preoccupied with trying to fend off McKinley's Praga. He and teammate Martin Compton had charged from the back of the field to finish 4th in the season opener at Croft and were on course to pull out a similar result here. This move putting the camouflage liveried Praga up to 14th place. Approaching mid-distance and the teams prepared for the mandatory pit stop. Danny Harrison getting ready to take over from Jem Hepworth, who had by now built a 7-second lead over Gary Townsend in the sister Praga. Mike Moss had now moved up to 7th in the Moss Motorsport BMW and drew alongside Sean Doyle down the Cooper Straight. But the Irish racer held the inside line and nosed back ahead into Surtees. Late on the brakes then into McLaren, and the Porsche edged further clear under acceleration through clearways. Right behind the pair of them was the EDF Motorsport run Seat of former champion Martin Byford. Coming onto the Brabham Straight, the more powerful Class 2 BMW burst into its stride and charged past the Porsche. Sadly, an early pit visitor had been the Jaguar F-Type, run by new team New Barn Racing. Adam and Callum Thompson's progress temporarily halted by a blown fuse. And there was a quick spin for Dave Scaramanga at Graham Hill Bend. But the Motus One Ginetta was soon back on its way. After having to give everyone else a head start at the beginning of the race, Warren McKinley had moved up into the top 10 by the time he brought the Class 2 Praga into the pits for a driver change, handing over to fellow ex-serviceman Martin Compton. An excellent effort so far in what was only the pair's 3rd race in a sports prototype. Another driver making real progress in the first half of the race was Marcus Fothergill in the white bespoke car's Porsche. From 19th on the grid, he swept past Martin Byford's Seat to claim 7th, temporarily at least, because the top 2 Pragas had both come in for their mandatory stops. Gary Townsend making way for Jack Fabi in what had been the 2nd place number 84 machine. Townsend had pitted 1 lap later than Jem Hepworth, who had enjoyed a sparkling debut in the Dunlop Endurance Championship. The number 85 VR Motorsport Praga now in the more than capable hands of teammate Danny Harrison. For the second half of the race, Ollie Hancock had taken over the wheel of the Digiplat BMW from Nathan Wells. Shortly into his stint, Hancock moved past the Ligier on the exit to Paddock Hill Bend. But as he turned back onto the racing line at Druids, there was contact and the BMW was sent into a spin, Hancock having to wait for a gap in the traffic before he could rejoin. Suffering misfortune of a different nature were SB Race Engineering, back into the pits shortly after Andy Schultz had taken over the Ferrari. The issue, a sheared track rod arm, was quickly resolved in around 5 minutes, but around the short 1.2 mile Indy circuit, 5 minutes equates to 6 laps, and they dropped to the back of the field. While the Pragas retained the top 2 positions, the Beluga Porsche, now in the hands of team boss and experienced GT racer Benji Hetherington, was comfortable in 3rd and on course for a Class 3 victory. Martin Compton, meanwhile, had picked up where Warren McKinley had left off, the number 86 Praga now 4th overall and leading Class 2. Compton was more than 30 seconds clear of closest class rival Charles Lamb, now guiding the Moss Motorsport BMW to 5th place. And from 21st on the grid, the Mac G Racing team were now up to 6th place, with team leader Johnny McGregor strapped into the Taranis until the end of the race. Running 7th was the yellow SG Racing Porsche of Peter Cunningham, but he was now under pressure from Tom Bradshaw in the CRH Racing BMW, Bradshaw having already moved into the Class 4 lead. And having recovered from his spin at Druids, Ollie Hancock was now flying in the BMW, propelling the Digiplat machine up to 9th place overall and 2nd in Class 4. Back to the battle for 7th place, and Cunningham was coming up to lap the bespoke car's Porsche, now driven by pro photographer Dave Bennett. Cunningham tried a move into Paddock Hill Bend, but he wasn't able to get fully alongside, and as Bennett turned in, there came contact. Bennett sent into a spin, Cunningham delayed, Bradshaw's BMW gifted 7th place, and Colin Sauter forced to take evasive action in his Ferrari. Completing the top 10 on its debut was the Reflex Racing Ligier, Marcus Vivian having taken over from Luke Davenport. After 60 minutes of racing, the VR Motorsport Prague of Danny Harrison and Jem Hepworth exited Clark Curve at the 72nd time to take the checkered flag, with Fabi and Townsend making it a second consecutive 1-2 finish for the team, and the Class 3 winning Beluga Porsche of Benji Hetherington and Adam Hatfield rounding out the overall top three.
I was a bit nervous about the start, obviously coming back from a knee injury as well. But yeah, I managed to just keep pulling away gradually and gradually. So yeah, I was very happy with the start.
Next time, highlights from the second race of the weekend at Brands Hatch and round 4 of the Dunlop Endurance Championship.